We can start getting seated. We're about to start. Thank you.
Oh, about to start.
You can sit down. Go ahead.
Should I sit down too?
Sure.
Okay, good.
Well, so my name is Burton Woodhull. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It's my distinct honor to present our next competitive advantage session here. It's presented by Pete Giorgio, who's a principal at Deloitte Consulting Monitor Group, and he will be presenting today on strategies for enhancing fan engagement, right? Redefining home field advantage. Quick housekeeping item. This is going to run for about 30 minutes, and there will be a panel right afterwards. I think Pete said that he's willing to meet with some of you, talk with some of you, but if we can start going towards the back so that we make room for the next session. With that said, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Doing all right? Yeah? Yeah? No, a little bit. Good. So, again, Pete Giorgio. I work for Deloitte. Wanted to kick off with a little story, if that's okay. Actually, real quick, do we have anybody in here from the Patriots organization? You work for the Patriots? What's your name? Frank? Okay, cool. Frank, I apologize for this in advance. I am a Patriots fan, so that's a good thing, right, Frank? I'm fully immersed. I believe, the dynasty, all the things that basically everybody outside of 50 miles from here hates about the Patriots, I believe in. This season, I did a lot of work for Frank. I did a lot of great things for Frank. I have my daughter last year for Christmas gave me a Rob Gronkowski jersey, so I have the official NFL Rob Gronkowski jersey. If anyone's with the league, yes, I bought the real one, and I wear it. And I wore it for every single game this season this year. And so I feel like I could take a lot of credit for a lot of the success that we had this year, right? Because when I wore that jersey, for the most part, we won, right? And we won because, why? Because I wore that jersey. And I wore it all the way through. But then the divisional game against the Broncos. Anybody watch that game? Rob Gronkowski was a beast in that game, right? I mean, the guy basically was running around on one leg, 4th and 10, 40-yard bomb, ran around. The touchdown that he scored at the end of the game, like the fact that somebody who's bigger than I am basically pirouetted around two people and went and got that ball was amazing. But I have to apologize because that night, my kids, every time we'd watch the Patriots all year long, we had wings. We had wings as part of it, and they won because my kids convinced me we should have pulled pork that night. And I apologize, Frank. It was the pulled pork, I think, in the end that did the Patriots in. And I say this not, it's funny and it's cool, but I'm sure every single one of you, as I said that, is saying to yourself, well, yeah, I have the same sweater that I wear every time my team plays, right? I always, you guys always, I tap my head twice on every extra point. All of those things that every single one of us has. And it's astounding to me the love and devotion that all of us put into these teams, these leagues, these sports that we play and we're associated. It's astounding. And to me, as somebody who's a consultant and works with a lot of businesses, it's astounding to me how little a lot of these, not for lack of trying, but how little the teams and leagues actually take advantage of that. I work with, in the past, I've worked with companies that would die for somebody. Every single person here probably wants to have some sort of relationship and engagement with their favorite team. How many of you want to have that with your insurance company? Right? Anybody here really want that depth of a relationship with their insurance company? Right? Maybe with your phone, right? Maybe with your phone, right? But the company that I bought my shoes from, no, okay? And we've got to figure out how we take advantage of that. We've got to figure out how do we actually build on that, use that to our advantage as we sort of build these relationships. And so what I want to talk today about is fan engagement in general. And wanted to spend just 30 seconds right at the beginning because fan engagement is probably one of the more, I think the only more overused term right now in sports other than fan engagement is probably analytics. Right? Nobody knows really what either of those things actually means today. And every single person who stands up here has a different definition. So when I talk about fan engagement, I'm talking about what a team, a league, an association, a sport does to build the relationships with the people who follow them, to actually build those relationships. It's everything from the team website to the loyalty program, to social media, your mobile app, even things during the day of the game, right? So events outside, tailgating, the entertainment that you do in the game, consent, all of this are components and pieces of that fan engagement. And the problem we've got today is all of these things exist, but hardly any of these talk to each other, right? Hardly any of these things talk to each other. And where we've got to get to, right, and what we've got to work on is how do we create a sort of seamless, connected, coordinated fan experience, fan engagement program at these teams. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about a bunch of different things that I think organizations should be doing, some of which are really far out there, which is great, some of which are a little closer in, but I think all of which every single person needs to have in their back of the head as a North Star, as a point that they're going to, as a place where they want to get to moving forward. And it's going to be important because today, how upset do we get when you go to some place and you can't use your phone to buy something, right? We're a little bit upset these days. We're kind of used to it a little bit. It's kind of a novelty when I can buy my groceries with Apple Pay. 2 years from now, we're going to be mad if that can't happen. We're going to be mad, and that's just one example of what these things look like. So we've got to get to a point where these things are connected and part of an integrated program. And this is important mostly because we talk a lot about millennials and the importance of engagement with millennials. We also need to be thinking about young fans too, right? So we just did a survey at Deloitte of about 4,000 sports fans. And one of the more interesting questions we asked them is we actually figured out who we would sort of self-describe as one of those face-painting fanatics, those people who just go crazy at games. The correlation between that and whether or not they played a sport when they were younger is astounding, right? 50% of people who played a sport, fans are 50% more likely to self-report as a fanatic when they're an adult if they played that sport when as a kid, right? And so we've got to think that's got enormous implications, right, for everything that we're doing. And the interesting thing is we need to start engaging these fans early, right? And the way we do that today is through various means that we talked about before, but focusing on them is important. And it's no longer just about the game. And I know we've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years now. The driveway to driveway, it's got to be more than that. But even driveway to driveway, I would argue, is not going to be sufficient. And it isn't even sufficient today. We need to be thinking about all of our fans, not just season ticket holders. We need to be thinking about what they do during a game. We need to think about what they're doing during the day of the game. We need to engage them across the entire season. We actually need to engage them 365 days a year. We need to have an active, ongoing relationship and dialogue with those fans throughout the year as we go. All right? And I think there's some good learnings from other industries as we sort of think about that. Previously in my career, I did a lot of work in the hotel space, and I think the hotels are a really interesting example. I mean, I think even just loyalty programs alone are a great example of how, one of the ways that I think a lot of teams are adopting now, that you can build these relationships. But the one that's kind of most interesting to me is the auto industry. I use the auto industry a lot when I talk about parallels with sports because you get a lot of the same types of dynamics that you do in the sports industry, right? Auto industry, typically a family is a Ford family, right? We're a Dodge family. I grew up, we had like 6 Toyotas when I was a kid, right? We were a Toyota family. So there is that sort of engagement. All of the auto dealers, one of the big things that they're worried about, how many people in here are worried about resellers and secondary markets and things like that? That happens in cars left and right. And what you see a lot in the car industry over the past 10 years is them really focusing on how do we build better and closer relationships with our customers over the lifetime of the car, right? It used to be you buy a car, drove off the lot, I don't really care about that person until 10 years from now when they come back and buy another car, right? But more and more, we're doing everything from when you go to a dealer now, the experience at the dealer is so much better than it was. Anybody own a car 15 years ago? Everybody in here looks a lot younger than I am, right? It used to be 15 years ago when you went and bought a car, you basically, you were in a bay that was overlooking the service area. You were talking to some guy that you basically didn't really want to shake his hand, things like that. Today, it's like this gorgeous experience. There's Wi-Fi, there's food, there's coffee, even that experience from the beginning. They've also figured out that maintaining that relationship, throughout the life of the car. How do you stay connected? How do you continue to connect with that owner of the car is important as well. And so I think we've got a lot to learn there. How do we build these relationships, extend these relationships, and deepen these relationships over time? So how do we get there? Right? So there's basically 5 tenets that I want to talk about today that we talk to our clients about in terms of actually building and engaging these relationships. And for those of you who are interested, I've got to put in the shameless plug. We've got some papers in the back about the research that we did on that. Paul, you want to raise your hand real quick? See Paul afterwards. He's got the papers. But there's basically 5 tenets that we talked about. Some of these you will recognize, but I think some of these are new. The first is know your target. You've got to be really choiceful. You cannot be all things to everybody, right? And this is true for sports, but it's true for Procter & Gamble. It's true for anybody. You can't be all things to all people. So you've got to be really specific about who you're targeting. Who do you want to go after? Who's specific? And I'm not talking about, I know everybody's got segmentations that they do for sales, right? That segmentation probably does not work for fan engagement, all right? It might, but it probably does not. You've got to really think about your purpose this time is not selling tickets, right? Your purpose this time is building a relationship. How do you build a relationship over time, and who do you want to build that relationship with? One of the interesting things we did in the survey was, you'll see up here this, because I'm a consultant, I can't do anything without it's not a 2x2, it's a 3x3, which makes it twice as good, right? So we've got the 3x3. And basically, we asked people questions along 2 axes. One was, how big of a fan are they, right? So this is the vertical axis. So were they a casual fan in that they kind of, were a fan from time to time, and it kind of depended on maybe once a year or things like that? Were they someone who really loved the game and tried to get to a game, 2-3 games a year, or a few different interactions with the team? Or were they a face painter, right? Were they somebody who really went crazy and was a fanatic of the team? And then we actually, interestingly, asked a bunch of questions that asked about their engagement with their favorite team. How did they engage with their team? How often? How deeply did they engage with their team? And one of the really interesting things we found was we assumed everybody would be on the diagonal. We assumed no matter what, fanatics would engage the most, right? No matter what, the lower your fanaticism was, the lower your engagement was going to be. And to be honest, for the most part, we did find that. We did find that for the most part. Although, if you look at that diagonal, only about half the people fall into that. Right? Half the people fall into that. So there's a bunch of different people out there exhibiting behavior that's not quite intuitive, right? And there's your opportunity, that 47% that falls outside of that. So can I take somebody who's a casual fan and actually, who's pretty highly engaged? Am I actually thinking about them as a revenue source? Am I thinking about that as an opportunity? Can I take a casual fan who's only engaged a little bit and get them a little bit more? There are opportunities out there to do that. And so what I'm saying is you want to pick these things. You want to actually figure out, and you can use this, there's all sorts of segmentations, but you got to figure out who you want to have a relationship with and actually make some choices there, because you can't be all things to all people. Second thing is you got to make it personal, right? You got to make it personal. Once you figure out who it is that you want to have a relationship, you've got to figure out what do they value, right? What do they want? What do they want to do? What's important to them, right? Really understand what those groups want to do, because that's how you build the relationship with them. And you need to figure out how to do it in a way that's not I have this group of 50,000 people who all want to do X, right? We're getting into a mode and a world where demographic segmentation is not nearly specific enough anymore. You've got to think about people's attitudes. You've got to think about people's behaviors. You've got to think about things that I talked about before, their level of fanaticism, and actually get down to very small groups that you can target and create really meaningful experiences and relationships with. All right? Number 3, you've got to think holistically about the experience that you're trying to create. And this is pretty important. You can engage with fans and build a relationship with fans across a whole bunch of different touch points. Right? There's a bunch of different places where you can do this. Everything from when they actually follow a player online, right, to when they sign up for email, when they engage with a fan page, when they write a post, when they actually buy equipment, when they watch TV. There's a whole bunch of different places where you can really think about that experience. And you've got to think about this thing holistically, all right? You've got to think about this. And the most important thing when you start is you've got to identify what all those touch points are in the first place. Even if you're not going to do anything with them all, you've got to figure out what they all are, right? Figure out what all those touch points are, how do they connect with each other, which ones can I influence, which ones can't I, right? Which ones can't I, which ones are most important, which ones are least important, depending on what I'm trying to do and what that person wants, and actually figure out where that intersection is. Because that's really going to be how you can really build those deep relationships, connect with those fans, and actually have that relationship that you want. And so you've got to think about this from sort of cradle to grave. You've got to, again, we talked before, you've got to think about it 365. You've got to think about at the game, outside the game, on social media, off social media. Think about all these different ways to connect with folks. And again, I said, year-round. You've got to think about this year-round. You've got to think about, season. I know everybody's moving away from just focusing on season ticket holders, but it's the lure of the season ticket holder is so strong. That lure to sort of keep focusing on them, spending 10 times as much with them that you do with other places. The opportunity outside that is huge. And the opportunity to sort of build programs. I know a lot of teams are building programs to engage, to do things in the off season, to do things around the draft, different things like that. But it's important to sort of think through those across the year. And then lastly, and in some ways, most importantly, thinking about how and where to recognize loyalty. And I'll spend a couple minutes on this one because I think it's quite important. I have this theory that one of the things that all of us in this room should be thinking about when it comes to fan loyalty. First, let's get it off the table. We sports invented loyalty, right? This is where loyalty came from. I've worked for grocery store chains that would die for the amount of loyalty that exists, even in this room. I love the Patriots so much more than Star Market, then it's astounding, right? I mean, it's not even. It's like literally like a penny on the ground versus up here. So they're dying for that. And one of the things we need to do is figure out how to leverage that. And I say it in the following way because we should be thinking about a world, and we should be preparing for a world and actually trying to get to a world where anytime somebody demonstrates loyalty, we know about it, right? And think about that. Anytime somebody demonstrates loyalty, we know about it. And again, in some ways, that's a pretty simple statement, but if you kind of think through what that means, it gets quite profound, right? So we should get to a world that anytime somebody, even today, we actually don't know anytime somebody goes to a game. Every team you talk about talks about what percentage of the fans they actually know are in their stands, and it varies greatly. Nobody says 100%, right? Nobody says 100% of the people in my stands. You would think that would be easy. We should know about any time somebody watches one of our teams on TV, right? We should get to a world that it happens. I know it's impossible today. The technology does not exist, but our friends in esports, by the way, are going to be there like next week. They can probably tell us that now. The name or at least the demographic information of every single person, who's watching esports right now. That's coming. We're doing things today to sort of learn every time someone demonstrates loyalty on social media. Again, the government privacy stuff aside for a second, I'd love to get a world where anytime somebody sort of sits in their office and talks about how great the Red Sox are going to be this year or not, depending on where you guys are from, that we know about that, right? So we've got to think about, now again, I don't know if we'll get all the way there. I don't know if we'll actually know all that, next year, the year after, but we're going to get there at some point. But even so, we should actually be preparing for that. We should actually be thinking about what the implications of that are and how we get there and what we need to do. That should be our North Star that we get to. So number one, we should know about it. Number two, we should actually recognize it. Right? So it's one thing to know about it, but if we want to build a relationship, if we want a reciprocal relationship with the people who play our sport or watch our sport, we've got to recognize it and engage folks in a dialogue. I mean, even something as simple as sort of saying thank you, right? Thank you for talking about talking smack about the Red Sox to your friend at work, right? Things like that. So we've got to, and then we've actually got to use that information, right? We've got to use that information that we find out about it. So I don't know if you guys know the history. Loyalty programs in other industries basically came from the fact that the only reason your grocery store has a loyalty program is actually not to get you to buy more food because of the loyalty program. It's actually to get you to give you their home address, right? And then to tell you every time you come in the store. Because without that, they don't know that every Monday you buy bananas, every Wednesday you buy cereal, and every Saturday you buy beer, right? They don't actually know that. But with the loyalty program, they do. They can get that information. We don't need that. People are dying to give us their information. They want us. They want to be the 6th man, the 12th man. They want to be part of our team. They want to do that. And so we've got to figure out ways to do that, to get them, to make that easy for them and to get them there. All right? So these 5 tenets, again, I offer these as we use these with a lot of our clients to sort of help them think through how to do these things. Again, you probably have your own as you go through these. But again, what we're trying to get to is if we take a step back again, what are you trying to do? What are you trying with your team, with your league? What sort of relation do you want to have with whom, right? What do they value? How do we get there? And then you've got to work to do it. You've got to work to get there. You've got to find out when they're demonstrating. You've got to find out when they're trying to engage, and you actually have to engage them and build that relationship over time. All right? Does that make sense to folks? Hopefully it was relatively simple. All right? Any questions from folks? Yeah. Yep. Sure. Yep. So the question is, how do you use fans to engage other fans, and the idea of a super fan, right? And so, more and more there are, a lot of times we call them evangelists, a lot of times we call them super fans, things like that. There are people who have influence especially within social media, right? There's certainly a lot of people who have, in some cases, outsized influence, right? So what I'd say is there another channel, right? They're both a segment in and of itself, right? So you want to have a different relationship, maybe a closer relationship with that super fan, right? And if you feel like if you're part of a league or a sport or a team that has a number of those, you may think about that as a very specific segment that you want to have with it. But they're also a channel, right? So they're a way to sort of reach other folks. But again, you want to make sure that you're doing that in a way that's consistent and connected with everything else that you're doing. But there's certainly a huge part of it. So, yeah. Yep. So the question is, how do you measure loyalty, right? And I think you're asking it because it's a really hard question to answer, right? So, yeah. So, again, to me, measuring loyalty comes back to this question of what are you trying to do, right? What are you trying to accomplish? And because loyalty, I think, could mean different. So for some people, loyalty means how many games they attend. Right? For some people, loyalty means how much they spend that they have. For other people, it means their presence on social media and how much they tout it. And again, what I would say is it depends a little bit on you as an organization, where you are, what you're trying to do, which one of those things actually is most important to you, right? And focusing on that. I mean, again, what we've done a little bit with what we've done is we've created a bit of an amalgam of a bunch of different statistics, just in terms of how often they go to things, how much, it's a bit of amalgam of all those. But again, if you're trying to implement this and understand and make it happen in the real world, you've got to figure out which one of those things you're trying to achieve, and what loyalty, it's kind of a cliche, what does loyalty mean to you, right? Does that make sense, or? It's a concept that's, yeah. I'm sure there's a bunch of sort of behavioral psychologists out there who have a much more scientific answer than I do. I deal in commerce for the most part, so. Yes?
How much is too much? When does it become invasive, or is there?
So the question is, how much isn't too much, and when does it become invasive? So 2 things that we see generally, not just in sports, but in all industries, people's barriers, people's comfort level with the amount of privacy or they do or don't have is certainly lowered, right? It's certainly lower. I mean, I share my address, 5 times a day doing things on the internet. 10 years ago, that was like verboten, right? I still don't share my social security number, right? But I don't have to because all the hackers have it anyway, and it's already out. The IRS has already helped me get it out there anyway. So that's number one. Number two, I would say with sports, the bar is even lower. They you know, if they could get an email from Brett Favre, they would give you literally the social security numbers and bank account numbers of every single person in their family, you know, out like 6 generations, right? And so, and what I'm not saying is we should take advantage of that, but I kind of am saying that, right? I mean, it's an advantage, right? It's an advantage that we have, that people are willing to do that. So I would guess, I mean, again, don't do anything illegal, right? Don't do anything illegal. But I think you know, I think you can go pretty far with this stuff. So at least from what I've seen. Sure, yeah. Yeah. You know, I think there's a bunch of really interesting programs out there that teams do, some of which are new and some of which are old. I do think I just want to pick up. So the question is, a lot of this is predicated on team performance, which, you know, a lot of times, at least on the business side, we don't have a whole lot of control over. So how do you manage that, and then which teams do a good job of that? One of my favorite examples, and I know it's old, but it's still putting out shares of the Green Bay Packers for fans to buy that are effectively worthless, other than the fact that you put a piece of paper up on your wall that says you're a shareholder in an owner of the Green Bay Packers. So I think there's simple things like that. Now, obviously, Green Bay's got a whole lot of other things going for it too. But if you're a new expansion team, right, in maybe MLS or something like that, and you're trying to sort of build, you're pretty far from being the Green Bay Packers, right? How do you do that? You know, a lot of the stuff that the New York FC has done, I think, has been pretty interesting in terms of actually building a base even before they go out there. So I've been pretty impressed with them. I'm trying to think. There was another team. It's escaping me right now. But there's a bunch of different examples. I mean, anything, from what I see, anything you think outside of that day of season ticket holder, right? Anything that sort of focuses outside that, I think is really interesting. I think you get outsized benefits from it because it's a segment that's not very well served today. So, yeah.
You mentioned that you want to have your fans early. How would you measure sort of like youth fans and loyalty? How would you approach that?
So the question is, how do you measure youth fans and loyalty? How do you find out? Yeah. Well, so getting it and measuring it are two different things, but they can be connected, right? So my daughter, anybody here AAU basketball? Anybody AAU? Yeah. So there's programs out there to sort of engage youth in sports like crazy. So soccer, to be perfectly honest, I think does it the best. Soccer is the most well-organized youth sport in the United States. You know, AAU basketball comes a little bit close, but it's a little bit more skeevy than a lot of the sorry, I hope there's no AAU people here, but than soccer does. And, you know, I think you can definitely track the sort of rise and growth of those programs as part of it. Understanding, like, how many 10-year-olds in the United States are Steph Curry fans actually might be quicker to measure how many aren't, but that's a lot harder, right? Because of this, you know, this starts to get into the privacy issues. You can't really find it. So that gets a little bit harder, but you can certainly measure youth participation in sports pretty easily. And again, it's a huge indicator. It's a huge indicator. I mean, football's in, you know, except for in Texas and Florida, you know, you might be worried about football, 20 years from now. So.
Kind of similar to the question that was asked earlier about the like good team performance versus rewarding fans. Like, how would you do the opposite of that? Like, you have a team that's performing poorly or like uncharacteristically poorly, and keeping fans in the fan base without like losing hope.
Yeah. So the question is, when you're losing, basically, how do you keep engaging with fans, right? How do you keep expanding that? And again, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, there will always be a core set of people that, you know, how many Eagles fans do we have here? Or Sixers fans? How many Sixers fans? Yeah. I mean, there's a core set of people that no matter, the Sixers had been on hard times, but they're not going away. So I think you've got to double down on that group. and really sort of focus. You don't want to lose those. But I do think that there's an opportunity. In a lot of ways, there's a first mover opportunity here. I think one of the biggest untapped places is Sixers fans who don't live in Philadelphia, right? How do you build how do you get them closer? How do you build a relationship with them? And then how do you actually figure out programs and develop programs that actually don't rely on the performance of the team? It's still, I mean, I'd still love to hear from Okafor, right? Even though they're not having their best season, I'd still love to have feel like I had a relationship with him and connection to him. So thinking about, it's still an NBA basketball team, right? It's still like the best of the best in the world. So relying on that is important. I think I'm out of time. So anyway, thank you guys very much. Again, here's my contact info, and there's papers in the back.